Hello and welcome back. In our previous tutorial, we built our first Azure resource. And the resource we built was a virtual machine, as you can see right here. Now, as an administrator, you will need to learn how to secure access into your resources. Now, the resources we build on our cloud platforms could be a VM, like you see above. It could also be a website. It could also be a network that we build. It could also be a storage account. All right. So whatever you build, you need a mechanism to secure access to those resources. Okay. Remember, these are resources you're using to provide or provision a service for consumption, and they need to be secured. The right person to administer your resource would determine how long your resource will stay up serving your consumers. All right. So it's very important that you do that. So with that said, let's dive into the topics of today, which is role-based access control. Role-based access control. Come with me to this board. Let's break things down. When you talk of a role-based access control, the first focus you must think of is role. What is a role? Now, we created a user account in the other video, and we created one for a lady by the name Ruby Smithfield. Ruby has been employed by company X, Y, Z to perform a certain function. Okay, that's her role. Okay, based on that role, she needs a certain access to this resource, which happens to be something you would call a scope. Of course, this scope being a virtual machine. All right. So when you hear the words role-based access, well, access speaks for itself. It's self-explanatory. Access is what can she do with her access on this scope. Okay. Now, when you look at this diagram I have here, you will see that our user, let's call this user Ruby S, has been given a green tick on this resource. What does that mean? It means by default, Ruby in this organization has been given the approval to one, access this resource and the approval to perform certain functions on this resource. Okay. Personally, as an admin, I have an ownership on all the resources that I create in my subscription. So already I can build and I can delete and I can delegate or designate anyone to do stuff on here, but you don't give the same powers to maybe a help desk person like Ruby. Okay, so we're going to go into a couple of things. So pause for a second, reflect on what we talked about. Remember, it is role based first before the access and then the control. The control is measures in place, security measures in place to control what she can do and what she cannot do on this resource. Okay, all right. Take a short break and let's continue. It is fair to say that corporations would want controlled access to their data. Remember, this VM is storing data, right? Okay, and because storing data, you would need to have controls in place to ensure that that data is secured. Okay, that data is secured. Now, to do that, one of the protections that you would put in place is to specify roles and access privileges for all the employees and business partners. Okay, roles and access privileges for your employees and business partners. Okay, all right. And so to do that, we implement a technology called the role-based access control, and that will help us to accomplish these tasks. We need to ensure that the company assets are protected and also support user access to those resources. So we're going to dive into creating an RBAC at the moment. So hang on with me, let's go back to our portal. Okay, let me just go to our Azure portal. What we have here is the VM from the last time. We want to secure access management for this resource because it's critical to a business. It's called production front-end Linux VM. Okay, and we know that RBAC is going to help us to achieve that task. Okay, now the RBAC again is an authorization system and is built on the Azure Resource Manager, which is what we call the ARM. The RBAC is fine-grained, and so you can give access to somebody. And if it'll be good for me to actually go back to this board and let's catch up a bit more. When I look at this resource here, this resource happens to be a VM. VMs have CPUs, they have memory, they have network interface cards, okay, they have disks. So when I look at the role of a person in the organization, let's say we had somebody who was a network engineer who needed to do things with the NICs. I could find the NIC attached to this VM and grant this user the respective RBAC role to perform functions and operations on this NIC. If this person was a data engineer and they need access to a data disk on this VM, I could also grant this person an RBAC just on the disk, not the whole VM. Okay, so his work is just purely with disks. All right, so disk 1, 2, 3, 4, what have you. Okay, so that is actually the beauty of that fine grained access management for your resources in Azure. Okay, things you need to know about Azure RBAC really. It will allow an application access to all the resources in a resource group. You can allow a user to manage VMs in the subscription. Also allow a user, like I said, to manage your virtual networks. So that includes your NICs and virtual networks and subnets. Of course, if you have a DBA in your organization, they can manage your SQL subscriptions or databases in the subscription. You can also give somebody the superpower, the root power, or the admin power to manage all resources, VMs, websites, subnets, anything else that you can imagine. Okay, all right. So before we get into building an access for this user, let's pause for a second. I want to touch on a bit of RBAC concepts that we've not discussed yet. Azure RBAC concept. Okay, we do have a terminology called the security principle. I think I touched on it some time back. Now, security principle is an object that represents something. So there's an object, you may have an object ID with some long tests, X, Y, Z, B, A, B, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that represents this person. Although before you and I, we see the name Ruby, Azure doesn't see the name Ruby. Azure sees the object ID because, of course, Azure needs to manage a large database of data sets of users and resources, VMs, and everything else. And then it needs to be able to be unique. So your user one, called Ruby one, could have a different object ID. User two, called Ruby two, could have a different object ID. Okay. All right. Now, a role definition, okay, is a set of permissions that lists the allowed operations. Okay. So when I go into the I am, okay, role for this VM or this resource, I will see role definitions. Okay, so Azure RBAC comes with pre-built or built-in role definitions. But of course, you can also customize and create your own ones. Okay, so you may have a role of a reader, a role of a contributor, okay, a role virtual machine, contributor, and so on and so forth. So the most common ones really are reader, contributor, owner, user access administrator. Okay. Then we have the word called scope. And scope really means the boundary for the requested level of access. Okay. How much access is granted. So this lady help desk would have operations to turn on the VM or turn it off. Okay. That's how much, that's the scope she's been given access to. Is the level of access that she's been fine-grained access to. Okay, so um, sometimes it could be somebody giving access to the management group or the subscription or the resource group or the resource. So it's actually in this flow. Somebody here has access to subscriptions, resource group, resources. Somebody here on subscription has access to the resource group and resources. Somebody here on the resource group has access to the resources. Somebody on the resource is just a resource or things attached to the resource. Okay. All right. An assignment as an important keyword. An assignment. Okay. An assignment attaches a role definition to a security principle. So a security principle being this user object. The assignments, what you see here, is what attaches this role definition. What is the role? The role is this lady has been checked to perform things like turn on the VM, turn it off, restart the VM. Okay, so your assignment is what attaches your role definition to you and the object. So once again, the object is here. That's you, and you have this role assignment to the object. Okay, all right. Now we will need to go and perform our first access for this lady's role. So welcome to our portal. Let's go ahead and do just that. All right, so over here we have our production VM. And when I go in here and I look at access control, as you can see here, very important that you pay attention to where that is. It's always going to be here until Azure changes that. But when you get to any resource, you'd have the overview first, okay? And then you would have what's happening on the resource and then the access control, okay? In fact, let's quickly have a look at the overview for a second. The overview brings you here. Now you can see that you have your subscription, which is where this VM sits on, okay? And I had some text created last time saying it's environment production. Why did I do that? When I go into virtual machines, and let's close this pane, let's go to virtual machines. I could create more than one virtual machine, of course, but I could also filter here and say, in my filter, I want you to select something called environment under tags. And when I do that, it will bring me just this VM. If I had many others, it would not show them. It would only show me the production ones. So tagging is very important. We'll get a bit more into tagging later on. So go to this virtual machine, this access control, and over here we're going to say, let's view my access. That's me. Now, I happen to be the owner. Okay, so I have full rights to manage all resources, okay, on this VM. Well, I happen to be the owner of the subscription anyway, so I have access to the resource groups, resources, and anything else that you can imagine, okay? Now, we can check access for Ruby. Ruby happens to be in the organization, and I'm searching Ruby Smithfield. Let's see if you have access anywhere to this resource. Click on that, and it says there's no assignments. There's no assignments at the moment, okay? So what we need to do is we need to give Ruby an assignment. Okay, what is assignments? Once again, attaching that security principle called Ruby, okay, to this VM. So we want Ruby an access into this VM. I'm just using this as an example. And we need to do that using the IAM. So I'm going to head over to, we can do role assignments and see over here as well what roles are assigned. And you can see I'm an owner, and I inherited that because I am the owner of the subscription. So that applies to everything else. So the inheritance means that I got it from somewhere. Okay. Because I am the owner of the subscription, automatically I'm owner of this VM. Okay. But we can look at existing roles or applicable RBAC roles. And like I said from the onset, these ones you see owner, contributor, reader. These are the very famous ones. Of course, we also have the user access administrator there. Now, quick one. The owner grants you full access to manage all resources. Also gives you the ability to assign roles. So I can assign role to Ruby, but Ruby can never assign a role to me because she hasn't got ownership. When I make Ruby a contributor to the subscription, she can also manage every resource, but she's never allowed to give access to, for example, John or Quasi. Okay, okay, so that's what it is. All right. Um, I'm gonna go and give an RBAC assignment to our friend here, Ruby. Now, the resource is called a virtual machine, and you can see it right here. So I'm looking for something that will give her access to turn on the virtual machine, turn it off, okay, and even restart the virtual machine, okay. All right, to do that, I'm going to scroll through and see the relevant ones. Now, a contributor could do all that, but it gives too much power. Let's see if there's a specific one. There's something called virtual machine contributor, which lets you manage virtual machines but not access to them. Another virtual network or storage account you connected to. So I wanted to be able to manage it, okay, but never log into the virtual machine, which is what I want. So I'll click on that, okay, and I can actually view. I can look at all the permissions that she can wield pertaining to this virtual machine. So there's a lot of things you can see: restart virtual machine, power virtual machine, start virtual machine. I can, of course, customize this role by cloning it and creating my own custom role, which only give it access to turn on and turn off. In the meantime, I just want to do what I need to do. So there are a lot of parameters here that you can use to give her access to do important things on this particular machine. Okay. All right. So when I got assignments, we can add assignments here if we wanted to. But let me give you the best way to do it. All right. So go back to the virtual machine. Add a role assignment is better that way. It's quicker. Select virtual machine contributor. Click on next. Now select members and reselect Ruby. Now you can see that I've created a group called Virtual Machine Help Desk. Okay. The idea for this group in the future will be that I would assign permissions or the RBAC to this group, security group, which means that anyone placed in this group, so this is the group, all right? If I put Ruby in this group, John, Kwasi, Patricia, Jennifer, they would automatically inherit the permissions assigned to the group and they can perform the functions. But today, simply our objective will be the user on the object to start with, okay? So we're just going to give this lady permissions to be able to turn on the VM and turn it off, okay? So here we go. All right, come with me. So select members. Now the user group, user or service principal, these are the things you can assign it to, but you can also assign to something called money identity. All right, we'll get into that later on, but we are assigning to user now. So who is this person? Ruby Smithfield. Click on select, you can see down here. And then it creates an entry for Ruby Smithfield. But here comes the beauty. It tells you that this security principal has an object Okay, it's an object in the databases of Azure, and it has an ID, and you can see the ID here, 2B03 DBF6, blah 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 blah. Okay, this is unique to Ruby. It's not the same for me or anybody else who's going to be on this platform. Okay, so this is the entry that will be placed. This is the alias that you and I can read, but it's the entry that the machine cares about. Then you click on next. Here we go. If I can get my mouse working, click on next. And it tells you now, let's break it down again. It says the role is virtual machine contributor. The scope, we talked about the scope, the extent and the level of access that we are granting this person is on what? It says you it is on a subscription, and the subscription ID is that in a resource group called this. And when it comes to Microsoft provide this, it's a computer. And what's a computer is it? It's a virtual machine. Wasn't a virtual machine, it's a production front Linux. Okay, so it's telling you where this application of the assignments is applied. It's not applied on subscription, it's not applied on the subscription ID or the resource groups. It's applied on something that is sitting in this hierarchy here called production front end Linux. So I'll break it down again. So subscription ID, resource groups, and we got the virtual machine groups. We got the virtual machine name. So our RBAC is here. Okay. All right. So it's like when you have a folder, and then you have an item in the folder, and you only have been given access to the item, not the folder per se, just the item. Okay. Now, who have we given this assignment to? It's to this object ID, also known as Ruby Smithfield. We've not specified in description. We just went ahead with adding it. Click on review and assign. And it says role assignments added. Click on here and I can see Ruby Smithfield was added a virtual machine contributor for front and Linux. So let's double check the virtual machine now for anybody who has access to it. Okay, let's close these things off. So when I go back into virtual machine and I look at access control again, I can look at role assignments, and you can see now that we have Ruby Smithfield and she's a virtual machine contributor. Now Ruby can log in with her account and she can see what do you call it? She can see the virtual machine and the access she has to it. Okay. So let me reset the password and we can log into Ruby to see if she sees this virtual machine. Okay. Hang on one moment. Welcome back. We have Ruby's details and a new password for her. I'm going to go ahead and enter the new detail, login, and enter the password. The password will force me to change it, but that's okay. I will change the password to something else. Okay, when I go in here now, I'm going to save that. I'll put a new password in that I want. And then I'll sign in. So now Ruby is going to sign in into Azure to see what she has access to. Okay, so Ruby comes to Azure and she hasn't got anything special going on here, but you can see her user ID over here, Ruby Smithfield, adds the company name. But then when I come in here, I can go to resources and see what she has. When I go to resource groups, I don't see anything there because there's no resource group assignments given to her. When I go to virtual machines, on the other hand, oh, lo and behold, Ruby has been given access to a virtual machine and she can see it under her login on Azure portal. Okay, so when I click on here as Ruby and I go into IAM control, I can now say view my access. And it tells me that your virtual machine what? Contributor. What can she do now? When I go into the virtual machine itself, Ruby can start the virtual machine. Well, let's start it and see if it's true because it's turned off. And then it says it's starting. Then I expect it to say running. What's happening? Let's get IAM control and see, can we give somebody an assignment? And it says over here, role assignment is disabled. Like you said, a contributor can never assign RBACs to anybody else. Okay, there's no way you can do that. You are given access to that scope and that's it. All right. So one more time, the VM is running. It's up and running. Okay. All right. So that's it, guys. Thank you. Let's just go over the review one more time. And so far, what we've managed to do, friends, is we have managed to get Ruby, an RBAC called the Virtual Machine Contributor, I'll say VMC for short, an assignment to the scope called the VM. Okay, so the security principal called Ruby, I'll call it SecP, security principal, has been given this role-based access control, the assignment for what? Virtual machine contributor on this scope called the virtual machine. Okay, so that's it so far, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye for now.